Welcome to the podcast hosted by timecam.com on how to stay on top of your work.
So hello, welcome back. This is Kate with the next episode of our podcast. And today my guest is Elizabeth Harrin. Elizabeth is an award-winning project management writer. She's also an active professional project manager with more than a decade of experience in financial service and healthcare. She is a fellow of the Association for Project Management. Hello, Elizabeth. How are you? I'm happy to have you here today.
Hello, Kate. How are you? I'm fine, thank you. And it's lovely to be on your podcast today.
Thank you. I'm always good. Thank you very much. So to begin with, can you say a few words about yourself and how did it happen that you work in the field that you work? Your professional road.
I'm one of the few people, I think, who actually chose to be a project manager, because I meet a lot of people who've ended up in project management by accident. But I was very lucky that in my first job out of university, I was a graduate trainee for American Express, and I got to see a lot of different areas of the business in that job. And I did a rotation in a department called Business Reengineering, I think it was at the time, which is basically project management. And I was there 3 months. I worked with some amazing people. In 3 months, when I was fresh out of school, I didn't do any project management myself, but I was supporting people who were doing project management. And I thought, this is a good job. No one ever told me about this at school. And it was all about lists, keeping people organised, keeping things on time, being structured. And I felt that it would really play to my strengths. So when that job came to an end, when that rotation came to an end, and I thought, okay, I'm no longer a graduate trainee. I have to get myself embedded in the right direction now. I was looking for a job that was project management. But before I went to university, I had no idea that it was even an option for people. And I think many people find themselves in that situation. When you fall into project management, it's not because you necessarily chose it, but because your skills lend themselves to the kind of work that needs to get done. So I suppose I just made that jump a little bit earlier because of the opportunities I had.
Okay, so let's talk about project management and team management. What are the good skills of a project manager who has a team under himself, herself?
Well, that's a really good question, because all project managers, that's not true. Lots of project managers have teams. The majority of project managers will work with a project team, but they don't always report to you. So there's two different types of team, I suppose, you could have. The one where you've got line management responsibility for your team, and then there's the other type where you're managing in a matrix environment. And I've done both, and it's been different challenges and different skills that you need in both areas, I think. More commonly, you end up as a project manager with a team that does not report to you for things like pay and appraisals and holidays, salary reviews, all that kind of stuff. And when you're in that kind of situation, I think the key skills that you need are the ability to motivate people and to communicate. Because if you don't keep everybody on the same page within the team, you find that everybody has their own priorities outside of your project, and they'll all go off and do something slightly different, or their interpretation of what you want them to do. So being able to communicate and bring them together as a team, even if they're in different offices, even if they have different levels of contribution to bring the project, I think that's really important.
So I'm thinking about challenges and risks, because this is connected particularly with project management and the evaluation of the risk. How can we evaluate risk, and how can we manage risk in project management?
I don't think you can do it by yourself. I think there's a role for everybody to play, and risk needs to be driven from a level of strategy, really, because that sets your risk appetite for the kinds of risks that you are prepared to take as a business, which cascades down to the kind of risk that you're prepared to accept within a project. I know the two levels of corporate risk and project risk are very different, but the sort of context for the kinds of decisions that you might take when you find a risk on your project would be informed by how your business approaches risk. And I suppose, to give you an example, if you're in a very lean startup and you're groundbreaking, you're doing something amazing as an entrepreneur, and you might take more risk and be prepared to accept a greater level of risk in your projects than if you were a 400-year-old investment bank, for example. So I think as a project manager, what you're looking at is trying to make sure that you understand the risks that your project is facing. And you have to do that with the involvement of the other people in the team and wider stakeholders and your project sponsor, because risks come from all kinds of different areas. And it's one thing to look at what's happening on your project with tasks, with kind of challenges that you're facing day to day. But there's also risks that might affect your project that come from outside your project, and your sponsor, your project office, other project managers might be able to tell you about those kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I've answered the question now.
Yes, you did. No worries. So how to let's talk about methodologies and practices of a good project manager. Do you think a project manager needs to follow certain practices or not really?
That's a very broad question. Yes, I think there are certain practices that it is good to follow. No, I don't think there is any one particular way that works for everybody. So I suppose, if you boil it down, what am I trying to say? You need to find a methodology that works for your culture, your business culture, and the kind of team and the kind of project that you're in. And once you've found a winning formula, then you stick with it. But having said that, there is a role to be playing for iteration. So you want to be looking at, how can we do things better all the time? So having a methodology written down in your handbook or on your intranet and then sticking with it for the next 10 years is never going to happen and shouldn't happen, because you want your project teams to be giving you feedback as a business that says, if we did it like this, if for small projects we had the flexibility to not write this 30-page project initiation document and maybe do a 5-page one instead, we're reducing bureaucracy, we're keeping things moving. So within an organisation, you might have several different methodologies that work. So, for example, I know businesses where there are certain things that are done with an agile approach, strict, Scrum, proper agile, and then there's other things that are done on a waterfall, and then there's other projects that are done hybrid. But actually, as long as it works for the project, that's fine. So there's 3 different approaches within one business, but the project managers or the project office, project sponsors, they're all influencing which is the right approach to be taking at any one time. So yeah, methodology is important, but it's less important than perhaps people might think, as long as you've got the right one.
Okay, so basically everyone needs to find the methodology that works best for him.
Yes, and you start obviously with the published best practices. So there's the IPMA operates in most countries, PMI operates globally. You've got national bodies and international professional groups that you can go to seek out best practice. So there's starting points. And methodologies, the Scrum Alliance, lots and lots of people put out project management best practices. But I think there is a risk when you slavishly follow the guidance, because it might not quite be right for you. And we used to see that a lot with Prince 2, because Prince 2 is one of the prevailing methodologies or standards in the UK, and people were adapting it to use in their business. But the book itself, one of the risks of taking a Prince 2 course is that you come out the other end and think you have to do it all. And I was working with project managers who were like, all right, now I'm on page 52 of the manual and I have to fill in this book, this document. Actually, you really don't, because your project doesn't need a cost management plan because you don't have a budget. So what are you doing? Why are you wasting your time? So it's about using professional judgment, I think, to pick and choose within a framework. And I suppose that's where project offices have such a role to play in businesses, because they can really guide project managers to make the right decisions and support the tools. They can craft a methodology that's right, or several methodologies that works. They support the technology that project managers use, all that kind of stuff.
Okay. So let's talk about us girls, because you wrote a book, Girls Guide to Project Management. And I'd like to begin with the question, a female perspective on project management. Do you think it's any different to be a woman in the project management world than being a man? Or are there any differences, or not really?
I get asked this question a lot, actually, and I normally end up saying no. There aren't. There's different things to factor in for being a working woman as opposed to being a working man, in terms of being taken seriously at work, dealing with imposter syndrome, having confidence, people talking over you in meetings. There's lots of things that women find challenging in the workplace. And I'm not a man, I can't tell you what men find challenging in the workplace, but I'm sure that there's equivalency on the other side of the coin as well. But in terms of how women and men approach managing projects, I've seen women do projects incredibly badly, and I've seen men do projects incredibly badly, and vice versa. So some of the best project managers I've worked with have been men. But I work in an environment where a lot of very, very good project managers are women. So I think it's so much to do with personality and character and what you consider to be important. And the project managers that I think are most successful are the ones who can communicate, who stay close to their teams, who know their people, who understand the business and have that sense of business acumen that thinks, perhaps we're not quite doing the right thing here. I need to go and check this with somebody. People who understand how to manage the finances and keep stakeholders happy. So the project managers who I see being the most successful in their jobs are the ones that kind of have that office politics level of engagement, understanding of the political architecture of their company. Mm-hmm. And they can be women or men. Both people operate well within those spheres. So I think there's an article on my blog about how women approach risk management, but I can't remember what the conclusions were from that. There was a conclusion that said it was slightly different to how men approached managing risk. But apart from that one, that was a study that was written up in one of the journals. I'm not aware of any other wide-scale studies that prove that there is a difference in how men and women approach projects in a way that affects success at the end. Mm-hmm. What do you think?
I actually agree with you. I also talked before with Susan Madsen, and she said exactly the same, that there's actually not much difference, and it all depends on the character, on the features that we have, like personality. So I think it's a stereotype that people say that female and male perspective is, approach is like different, or maybe we are not treated equally, but I think we actually are. So that's what I think.
Okay, I think there's a lot of truth in that. I remember receiving an email from a guy who was a teacher in Africa, and I can't remember the details of the email, but I remember him saying that he was teaching a project management class to a group of young women and was saying, here are some examples of women who are successful project managers, and was using my blog as one of the examples of a source for interviews and things, because there weren't that many female role models in his culture, in his country. So I think they probably, if you looked at the international picture, you might conclude something different. But over here in the UK, I like to think that we're moving more towards parity.
Yes, I think it's the same in Europe and in the United States. So I'd like to ask you a question about your book, The Girl's Guide to Project Management. Can you tell us in a few words what it is about and what topics does it touch?
Well, I've never turned Girl's Guide to Project Management into a book, but it's my blog and I write there a couple of times a week. And I cover all kinds of projects and all kinds of people working on projects. But I'm trying to give people tools to help them manage their projects with more confidence and less stress. So I'm trying to provide real life tools and tips that I have used, templates, bits of advice, things about how to manage projects in the real world, really, because I think so much of what we see and so much of the project management literature is about what works in an ideal environment where you've got a wonderful stakeholder group and you've got a perfect sponsor who turns up to every meeting and your team just loves you and does everything that you ask and all your tools work perfectly. And who works in an environment like that? So there's certain things that I prefer to talk about what real project management is like. So how do you delegate something when somebody doesn't want to receive the task? How do you get your team to stay motivated when you've got no money to give them bonuses? That kind of thing. And people seem to like it. There's lots of project management blogs out there, lots of project management books as well. So the books I've written have been a little bit more structured.
Okay. I also like to ask you, because you have a lot of experience, what advice would you give to young people and young women entering the world of project management, and also to startups, because there's a lot of startups which fail and because they don't know how to manage projects. So what advice would you give?
I'd say project management is a really great career. It's a job that opens lots of doors and lets you see lots of different areas of a business because it touches on so many different things. And there's so much variety. So at the moment, I'm working on projects that are to do with regulatory compliance. But a few years ago, I was working on a software launch, and before that, I worked on an internal comms project. And the amounts of different areas of the business I've seen as a project manager are far more than I would ever have been able to be involved with than if I had taken a line job in marketing and worked my way up from marketing assistant to marketing manager or something.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in terms of people joining the profession, it's a fantastic time to be learning about how to manage projects. But the things that will make you successful are being able to structure other people. So you do have to have some degree of interpersonal skills. I'd say that's probably the most important thing to work on. And you can learn it. I mean, we were saying about not really any differences between how men and women approach projects. The skills that make people successful are skills that you can learn and improve. So, there's no innately perfect project manager. Everyone can do a bit of learning and studying and practicing and reading to help improve their skills. And being able to get work done through other people is really the critical skill. So I think if you're in a startup environment and you're trying to stay organised, I think the important thing to think of there is you've got a very small team. So you're kind of all having to do lots of different roles and wear lots of different hats. And I'd say the key thing to think about is to stick with your goals, stay focused. And this goes actually for whatever size of project. Because if you know what it is that you're trying to achieve, and you can then work out how you're going to get there. But if you don't know what the end goal is and you don't have very clear success criteria about how will you know when you've got there, you kind of just flounder and it just all becomes BAU work on a Kanban board that just never ends. You just keep moving the tasks across. Whereas if you know that you're launching an app or you are closing down an office or something, you have a very clear defined endpoint and you know exactly what it is that success looks like. You know what you're trying to achieve. So when you hit a stumbling point, whatever that might be, you can think, does this help us achieve our goal? Yes, we do it. No, we don't do it. And then you don't get distracted. Because if you can keep focused, and you can also understand what's important. So launching an app, it might be most important to stay on budget. But actually the time for launch might be a bit flexible. You might be able to go over a few weeks or launch it a bit early. But if you're closing down an office and you've told everybody the office closes on the 1st of March, the office will close on the 1st of March. And if you have to throw more people at it or you have to spend a bit more money, there might be some latitude to do that as long as you hit that deadline. So understanding what your customers want as well in terms of how they will rate success. And I'm waffling a bit, but this all comes back to Martin Barnes's iron triangle: time, cost and quality. And project management has moved on a long way since that, but it is still a very good underpinning structure for people to think about what parameters they've got to work within. Has that been too waffly, or does that make any sense?
It makes perfect sense.
Good.
It's my pleasure to listen to you. So, and I guess the audience will also gain some really useful tips from you.
Well, hopefully, because I think this is something that we find a lot with project managers I speak to, is this massive disconnect between what they've been asked to do and what the business is trying to do. And PMI have been talking a lot about this over the last few years, about strategy execution. And you can only deliver your strategy, whether that's a strategy as a startup or whether that's a multinational company or whatever, or even just your objectives for your department for the year. You deliver that through change, and the change happens through projects. It's not good enough just to write a fancy PowerPoint presentation about what it is you want to do. You actually need people who can take that, translate that into tasks, and then do the work. I think a lot of project management is just telling people that they need to do the work and helping them get there, remove the roadblocks. No, it's a lot more than telling people what to do. But sometimes it does feel like people need a little bit of guidance to get in the right direction.
Yes, that's true. As you mentioned the Prince 2 method, in that it's used in UK. Mm-hmm. Do you have certain methods that you use in your life, in your work, that work the best for you?
Yes, I think the tool that I've been reliant on the most over the last few years has been my RAID log. So I have a spreadsheet with a tab for actions, risks, issues, dependencies, contacts. It's a workbook that I have open pretty much all the time. Sometimes I'll have a milestone tracker in there as well, so that I can highlight the key milestones. Because a lot of what I do at the moment is business change. So when people say to me things like, you have to have this breakdown structure, and it has to be this, and you need to do critical path method. Actually, a lot of that doesn't work for the kind of environment that I'm working in. And maybe purists would say they could find a way to shoehorn it in, but I find it doesn't work in my setting. So having a milestone plan, which is really just the high level milestones, and then having a detailed project plan in my project management software is fine, but nobody ever wants to look at that. So apart from me. So my spreadsheet is kind of my go-to document that I have open all day, every day, and it gives me a frame for what I'm trying to do. I can track all my tasks. I can track all the risks, the issues, the decisions that we've made, because typically people will come back and say in 6 months' time, oh no, we're not going to do that. And I can go, yes, we are, because we said we would 6 months ago, and you agreed this in this meeting. And it just saves a lot of time through going back through minutes. So I suppose it's less of a method, but more of a tool that helps me deliver my method. But I think, like all project managers, I just go with the kind of project initiation and kick-off planning. Then you do your execution phase with various different gates in the middle just to check that you're on the right gap, and then we do close down. I suppose something we do differently, we try to encourage lessons learned feedback from our stakeholders all the way through the project. In fact, we're seeing more and more people do this. 5 years ago, it was very unusual for a non-agile project to be capturing lessons learned as you go. It's much more the process, and the books tell you to, or the books did tell you, the PMBOK Guide version 6, the new latest edition of the standard from PMI, has actually got lessons learned much more prominently weaved all the way through. So I think that the culture's changing, but it used to be the case that you just waited till the end to do the lessons learned review. And for a long time now, we've been trying to incorporate lessons learned far earlier, because then you can change things and improve things as you go, rather than get to the end and go, oh, I wish we'd done it like that. I think, well, you just wasted 6 months. You could have just done it, couldn't you, if you knew about it 6 months ago?
Mm-hmm. So I'd also like to ask you, what inspires you in your work, and what books do you read to always stay updated to the latest news, maybe in project management world?
What inspires me? I tell you what really inspires me is going to conferences, because I think we get so bogged down into our daily life about, you learn everything there is to know about your project and your team, and you just turn up to work, you do the job, it's your world. And when you go to a conference and you can sit there and listen to somebody from a different country give a presentation and go, yeah, I can really associate with that. I understand that. That's a fantastic idea. Why don't I try that in my business? Or even if it's something, case study presentation, something you could never implement in your job in a million years, it's still inspiring to hear the challenges and the approaches other project managers are using. So if you're feeling a bit stuck in a rut, having a day out of the office to go to a project management event would be a huge top tip from me. I think that's a really great way to re-energize and come back to work thinking positively about all the cool things that you've heard. And as for books that I read loads. I'm reading at the moment Filling Execution Gaps by Todd Williams, and I've read recently Sanket Pai's book The Winning You, which is more around personal improvement, I suppose, being your personal best. So I read a lot wide-ranging management books. I think project management books, it's important to keep up to date with what's happening, what the trends are, but you probably get that more through journals and through conferences than I do through books. I find project management books to be quite expensive, actually. So the cheaper options of getting things out of the library, or reading extracts from books online, checking out people's blogs. I subscribe to a ton of project management blogs. So I try and keep up to date through those as well.
Okay. So my last question is connected with the name of the podcast, Stay on Top of Your Work. Mm-hmm. How do you stay on top of your work?
I'm bad at staying on top of my work. I really, I do struggle. So I do find that staying on top of my work helps more when I have a very clear to-do list. So I do try and keep my to-do list focused. I spend some time the evening before working out what my 3 top tasks are for the coming day, so that I can make sure that I do my priority work first. I try to make sure that I've got some blank time within the week to catch up on emails and to do all the tasks that I need to do, so that I'm not working too late into the evenings. So, and I constantly rewrite my to-do list. So once a week I'm writing out my to-do list. I like to have a to-do list on pen and paper. So I'm not one of these people with a, like Evernote or whatever tools there are to capture to-do lists. I can't cope with that because I'm working between too many different devices and in too many different locations. So with the notebook, I just carry it around. And I'm a writer as well. So there's just something, the physicality of writing a list and crossing tasks off. I like that. So I think that's probably how I try and stay on top of things. Also by knowing what the priorities are and what the upcoming deadlines are, so that I can be using my time in the most productive way, knowing what's the important things to be happening, so that you're never at the situation where I've got a massive, great big project board meeting tomorrow and I haven't done any of the paperwork. Because what I tend to do there is the week before, I will say, I'll block an hour in my diary to say prepare project board papers and agenda and post them and email them to the attendees. So I can use my diary as well to keep myself organised by blocking out time to do work.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Elizabeth, thank you very much for attending this interview. It was my pleasure to talk to you.
And you too. Thank you so much for having me on the show today.
Thank you very much. So we got some good tips today from Elizabeth on how to stay on top of your work. You can find more information on her under this podcast, so make sure to check this out. And I want to know your comments. Let me know if this helps you and what you'd like me to include in my interviews with my amazing guests. And I look forward to talking to you soon. Bye-bye.
This podcast was brought to you by TimeCam. You can listen to it on iTunes and SoundCloud. Subscribe to get more content and always stay on top of your work.